Hey, welcome to the briefing. What I'm going to cover with you today is this. A better read protects the decision after it. Let me start this by saying I know I've been talking a lot about angles recently. It's to give you more ways to understand and process the material. It's not reasonable for me to assume that all you need is to hear it once and you've got it. That's not how habits are formed. I do thank you for listening. Now let's get moving. The read is not just about understanding what happened. The read protects what you are about to do next. That sounds simple, but it took me time to respect it the way I should have. Because earlier in leadership, I thought the assessment was mostly about identifying the problem. What happened? Who was involved? Where did it break? What needs to be corrected? And yes, all of that matters. But the piece I did not appreciate enough at first was this. Once you make the decision, your read starts moving through the whole system. It shapes the message. It shapes who gets corrected. It shapes what gets assigned. It shapes who carries pressure. It shapes what the team believes you value. It shapes whether the next week gets cleaner or whether the team spends energy executing a correction that was built on a weak picture. That is where I have gotten it wrong before. Not because I did not care, not because I refused to make a call, not because I was afraid to hold a standard. It was almost the opposite. I saw enough of the situation to believe I had the issue. Then I made the decision from that read. The decision made sense from the angle I had. But later, when the rest of the picture came out, I could see the cost. The problem was not just that the read was incomplete, the decision carried that incomplete read forward. That is the part I want to talk through. A bad read does not stay in your head. It does not stay in the assessment phase. It travels. It travels into the correction. It travels into the tasking. It travels into the follow-up. It travels into the way the team talks about the problem after you leave the room. That is why a better read matters. A better read does not just help you explain what happened, it protects the decision after it. And that is the leadership discipline behind this briefing. Now, there is a trap here. Most leaders think the big risk is not acting fast enough. Sometimes that is true. Sometimes delay creates damage. Sometimes the leader waits too long. Sometimes the team needs direction. And the leader keeps collecting information because making the call feels uncomfortable. That is a real problem. But it is not the only problem. There is another danger, acting from an incomplete read. That danger is quieter because the action can look good at first. The leader sees the visible issue. They make the call. They push the team into motion. The meeting ends with direction. Somebody owns the next step. The leader feels decisive. From the outside, it can look clean. But if the read was narrow, that decision now carries the wrong assumptions into execution. And that is where the damage compounds. Because now the original issue is still sitting there and the leader has added a decision on top of it. That decision may create work. It may create pressure. It may create reporting. It may create correction. It may create a new standard, and it may create accountability. But if it was built from the wrong read, the team may spend the next week executing the wrong correction. That is expensive. And I do not just mean money. It costs time. It costs trust. It costs patience. It costs energy. It costs credibility. It makes people wonder whether leadership actually understands what is happening at the operating level. That is why this matters. The read has a tail. That is the phrase I want you to keep. The read has a tail. It keeps moving after you think you are done assessing. It follows the decision. It follows the communication, and it follows the assignment. It follows the consequence. And if the read is weak, the tail is messy. Think about that. If a leader reacts only to the loudest complaint, the team learns that noise drives action. If a leader corrects the person closest to the failure, the team learns that visibility creates blame. If a leader changes the process before understanding the friction, the team learns that every problem creates another rule. If a leader pushes harder when ownership was unclear, the team learns that effort matters more than clarity. That may not be what the leader intended, but intent does not erase impact. That is one of those lessons experience teaches you. You can intend to create control and still create confusion. You can intend to hold a standard and still aim accountability at the wrong person. You can intend to protect the customer and still overload the team with a correction that does not fix the driver. That does not make you a bad leader. It means the read needed to protect the decision better. Let me give you a different kind of example. A nonprofit operations director is managing a regional food distribution program. Several community sites depend on that program. Each site has different demand, different volunteers, different delivery windows, different storage limits, and different client needs. Over a few weeks, one site keeps missing its distribution start time. Clients are waiting outside. Volunteers are frustrated. The site coordinator is defensive. A donor representative is coming next month. The executive director wants the issue corrected before it damages confidence in the program. Now, the first report sounds simple. The site coordinator is not managing the schedule well. That is a clean explanation. The coordinator owns the site. The site is starting late. The pattern has repeated. So the decision almost writes itself. Correct the coordinator, tighten expectations, require earlier setup, track start times daily, escalate if it continues. That sounds like accountability. It may even look fair from a distance. And this is where I want to pause because I have made this kind of mistake in different forms. You see the owner closest to the outcome, and the decision starts forming around that person. They own the location, they own the shift, they own the task, they own the report, so they become the correction point. Sometimes that is right, but sometimes they are not the cause. Sometimes they are the person absorbing the consequence. That difference matters. So before the operations director makes that decision, they widen the read. Start with the site coordinator's angle. The coordinator says, "We are setting up as fast as we can." The issue is the supply truck. It arrived late twice. It arrived incomplete once. When the truck is late, volunteers stand around waiting. When the truck is incomplete, the coordinator has to reshuffle inventory, call another site, and explain delays to clients. Now the picture changes. The coordinator may still own part of the site execution, but the coordinator is also absorbing upstream instability. So the director has to ask a harder question. Am I about to correct the person managing the symptom instead of the condition creating it? That question protects the decision, because without that question, the director may assign pressure to the wrong place. And when pressure lands in the wrong place, trust starts to erode. Now widen the red again. Look at logistics. The driver route changed 3 weeks ago. The route was changed to reduce fuel cost and improve efficiency across the region. On paper, the route looks better. That matters. Somebody probably made that change for a reason. Maybe it did reduce fuel cost. Maybe it did improve part of the system. But now the route places this site after a larger location that often needs extra unloading time. So the delay is not random. It is built into the new route sequence. That changes the decision again. Now, if the director only corrects the site coordinator, the real driver stays alive. The coordinator becomes more frustrated. The volunteers keep waiting. The clients keep losing trust. The executive director still sees late starts. And the organization may start thinking the coordinator is the problem when the route design is creating the condition. That is how a narrow read creates a bad decision. Not because the leader is careless, because the first explanation was too easy to trust. Now look from the volunteer angle. Volunteer attendance has become inconsistent. At first, that looks like commitment. Maybe people are not reliable. Maybe they do not understand the importance. Maybe the coordinator is not managing them firmly enough. That is one read. But when you look closer, the volunteers are adjusting their behavior because the start time has become unpredictable. Some are retired and need the shift to stay inside a certain window. Some are students with class schedules. Some are employees volunteering before work. When the site starts late, they leave early or stop signing up. Now the late truck creates a volunteer gap. The volunteer gap slows setup. The slower setup creates more delay. And now from the outside, the site coordinator looks even more responsible. You see how that works? The system feeds the problem, then the visible person looks like the cause. That is exactly where leaders have to be careful. Because if you correct the coordinator without seeing that loop, you may feel like you addressed accountability, but you actually made the system feel less fair. The better question is, what looks like a people issue, but is actually the result of a timing issue? That question protects the decision. Now look from the client angle. To the client, none of this internal complexity matters at first. They are waiting. Some have transportation windows. Some have childcare constraints. Some are missing work time. Some are embarrassed because the delay is happening in public. They do not care that the route was changed to reduce cost. They do not care that the truck had an extra stop, and they do not care that the coordinator is trying to reshuffle inventory. They experience delay. They experience uncertainty. They experience a loss of dignity. That matters. And this is where the decision gets more mature, because the fix cannot only be internal. The route pressure has to be corrected. Volunteer timing has to be stabilized. The site coordinator needs clear expectations, but client communication also has to improve while the system correction is happening. not as a substitute for fixing the root, as protection for trust while the deeper fix is being made. That is a better decision, not softer, more complete. And that is the point of this briefing. The 360-degree overview did not just help the director understand more, it protected the decision from becoming part of the problem. That is the part leaders miss. They think the read ends when they understand the issue. No, the read protects the decision, because once the decision is made, the decision starts creating consequences. That is why the leader has to ask, what decision would I make if I trusted this first read too early? In that nonprofit scenario, the answer is uncomfortable. The director would correct the coordinator. That correction would look fair from the outside. The coordinator owns the site. The site is late. The executive director wants correction. But the decision would miss the root driver. It would add pressure to the person already managing the friction. It would fail to protect volunteer reliability. It would do little for client trust. It would tell the team that leadership reacts to the visible owner, not the operating system. That is the real cost. And again, I am not saying the coordinator gets no expectations. That is not the lesson. The coordinator may still need a tighter setup plan. The client update process may still need discipline. Volunteer communication may still need structure. But now the decision is built from a wider read. So the decision becomes review the route change, stabilize delivery timing, protect volunteer windows, improve client communication during delays, reset site coordinator expectations based on the actual operating picture. That is a stronger decision because it is aimed at the condition, not just the visible outcome. That is what better reads do. They protect the action from becoming shallow. They protect ownership from being assigned to the wrong layer. They protect the team from wasting effort. They protect trust from being burned by correction that feels unfair. They protect the leader from confusing visible responsibility with actual cause. That is leadership work. Now, I want to bring this back to the human side, because when you get this wrong as a leader, it does not usually feel good afterward. You may realize you corrected someone who was carrying more than you saw. You may realize you pushed a process change that created more reporting but not more control. You may realize you added pressure to a team that needed clarity. You may realize your decision made sense from one angle but created friction from another. That is not a moment to perform confidence. That is a moment to learn. That is where you sharpen. And that is where humility matters. Not the kind of humility where you beat yourself up. That is not useful. The kind of humility that says, my first read may be incomplete, and my decision will have consequences if I do not check it. That is mature leadership. That is not weakness. That is control. Because the strongest leaders I respect are not the ones who pretend they never missed. They are the ones who learn faster after they miss. They are the ones who can say, I see what I did there. I trusted the visible angle. I moved pressure instead of improving the system. I need to adjust how I read before I decide. That is how experience becomes wisdom. Not from having the experience, from processing it honestly. Now here is the practical field move. When a decision is forming quickly, name it. Say it plainly. I am about to correct this employee. I am about to change this process. I am about to escalate this issue. I am about to add another update requirement. I am about to assign ownership. I am about to push the team harder. That first step matters because vague decisions are hard to test. Clear decisions can be checked. Then ask, what red created this decision? Was it a complaint, a report, a number, a visible failure, a prior experience, a conversation with one person, a pressure message from above? That question helps you see whether the decision is built from one angle or from a wide enough view. Then ask the protection question. If my read is incomplete, what does this decision fail to address? That is the question that saves you from bad correction. It may reveal a handoff issue, a timing issue, a resource gap, unclear ownership, customer impact, an upstream driver, a leadership behavior that trained the wrong pattern. A decision can create motion without creating control. That is the warning. If the decision misses the driver, the team may execute it perfectly and still end up back in the same place. That is frustrating for everyone. Then ask, who carries the consequence if I am wrong? That question will slow down careless action fast, because every decision puts weight somewhere, on a person, on a team, on a customer, on a process, on a timeline, on trust, on future workload. If you are wrong, who pays? That is not a dramatic question, that is a leadership question, because leadership is not only about making the call. Leadership is about understanding what the call does to the system. That is why a better read protects the decision after it. Now, watch for these signs. If the correction feels obvious too quickly, check the read. Obvious does not mean wrong. It means it deserves one more check. If the same person keeps becoming the problem, look upstream. That person may be responsible, or they may be standing where the failure finally becomes visible. If the fix creates more reporting but not more control, check the read. More updates do not automatically improve execution. Sometimes they only add administrative weight on top of a broken handoff. If the team follows the decision but trust drops, check the read. Compliance is not belief. A team can execute your instruction and still believe the instruction was built on a poor understanding of the situation. If the issue returns with a different label, check the read. That is one of the clearest signs that the organization keeps changing the name of the problem because the driver was never corrected. Today it is communication. Next week it is accountability, then staffing, and then training, and then attitude, and then process. Different labels. Same driver underneath. That is why leaders need the discipline, and especially frontline leaders, because frontline leaders live closest to pressure. They are expected to make decisions before everything is clear. They do not get perfect information. The customer still needs an answer. The team still needs direction. The operation still has to move. That is exactly why the read matters. Not because you have time to study forever, because your next decision will start creating conditions for everyone else. So before you act, ask, what decision is my current read about to create? That question alone can prevent bad correction, wasted effort, and unnecessary friction. It can protect the team from being sent in the wrong direction. It can protect the leader from confusing pressure with clarity. It can protect the organization from turning one incomplete read into a week of bad execution. That is the practical value of 360. It helps the leader avoid being captured by one angle, one voice, one report, or one visible failure. It does not replace action. It improves the action. And that is why the read matters beyond the read. The read becomes the decision. The decision becomes the message. The message becomes tasking. The tasking becomes execution. The execution becomes consequence. That is the chain. If the read is weak, the weakness travels. If the read is cleaner, the decision has a better chance to hold. So this week, take one decision you are about to make. Write one sentence. The decision I am about to make is... Then answer 3 questions. What read created this decision? What would this decision miss if my read is incomplete? Who carries the consequence if I am wrong? Do not overbuild it and do not turn it into a meeting. Just protect the next decision. That is enough to start. Because action is not automatically leadership. Action built on a narrow read can become rework. Action built on a shallow read can damage trust. Action built on the wrong read can make the leader look decisive while the team absorbs the cost. A better read protects the decision after it. Thanks for listening to the briefing.